Okay, thank you, Ruslan, and nice to be here at this conference. My name is Erik Versavel. I work for ING Bank here in Ukraine. I've been here approximately 5 years. So connecting with what you were saying in your introduction, Ruslan, of course we've seen an incredible evolution of the situation in the banking system. I will try and give some general comments on it, and hopefully we can then have a debate here in the panel and with the audience. You mentioned that the situation has not improved or changed a lot since last year. I will try and comment on that as well. Yeah. First of all, I want to say that to understand what we have, we need to probably be very honest and very transparent about what we need to have to start the banking system again, because it has to start again. It has stopped. We need to find a way to restart it, to restart lending into the economy, and therefore we need to understand what the problem is. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Yeah? In our view, and in my personal view, we are not specifically looking at a short crisis. I think it is much better for everyone, and if we want to try and find solutions for the situation now, to look at this as a permanent state of an almost permanent state of distress in the financial system. This may sound a little bit harsh, especially for those of us and those of you who remember the boom, and I think the boom was 2006, 2007, 2008. In the way that, if we think like this boom was probably a mistake, because the fundamentals of the financial system and the fundamentals of the economy did not support the massive lending that took place at in that specific period of time. So there was an enormous influx of foreign currency lending into the market, but in fact the underlying parameters and requirements were not sufficient to actually sustain that. And therefore we need to look at the situation before that and at a much longer period of time than just saying on the 1st of December 2013, when the Maidan revolution started and the currency started to collapse, and try and fix that. I think that is insufficient to find solutions for the problems that we have. After all, Ukraine, we must be very honest about that, since independence had only a very few years of GDP growth. And all the rest was actually negative growth. Yeah? And the financial system was distressed and was not functioning properly, or the way it should function, before the Maidan revolution. I think we need to understand that. I think it's absolutely essential for what we have. So what we see at this point in time, we have emergency measures to try and control a very difficult financial crisis. These emergency measures were put in place after the revolution, or a few months afterwards. Also a control of the effects of FX transactions in anticipation of the elections in September 2014 and all that. It all was very difficult, and now we have a full set of emergency measures in place. That's what we have. There are many reasons for that. Of course, something had to be done. We all know and we all follow very carefully the statements by the central bank and by IMF on when all these restrictions can and will be released. Because of course, without the release of these restrictions, specifically the capital controls, it is very difficult to talk about the return of investment appetite to the country. That's just a basic reality. Yeah? We also see, apart from the emergency measures, we also see a cleaning up of the banking system, or I should probably say an initial start of the cleaning up. If we closed 50 to 60 banks out of 180, and if the central bank, I don't know if Dimitri Sologub is here or was here today, he himself says that NBU did not close any bank which was not already dead. That means that there was actually no systemic impact of the closure of these banks. So because if these banks were meaningless and were just pocket banks, then their closure does not have impact. And in our assessment and in our view, very important additional steps need to be taken in respect of the banking system, the number of banks and the status of certain banks, and then very specifically also the state-owned banks, before we can start talking about renewed confidence and trust in the banking system. Because what we also see is that the financial markets do not function. There are no money markets. Banks do not lend money to each other overnight. So the money markets do not function, so there is no trust in the system. And there, in that context, it is fantastic and an absolutely great achievement of the country and especially of the central bank and the government, that no retail crisis has emerged in the banking system. There have not been real bank runs. So that's fantastic, because the banks amongst each other do not trust the system, and therefore we cannot talk about a financial system. So that is also what we see. So in our assessment and in our view, the measures and the work that has taken place are preparatory measures, and some very important other steps need to be taken to restart the banking system and to create trust amongst the participants. So if you take this into account, and this is the last thing that I will say, is we still have not addressed, or the country has not addressed, the fundamental problems which existed before 2006, 2007, and before 2013, to create an environment in which it is possible for the banking system to finance and to support investment and economic activity. We have not seen institutional improvements in creditor rights, in legal recourse, etc. So suppose we all start lending tomorrow, suppose all the banks start lending, this is separate from the question to whom we would actually start lending, because that is probably the biggest question. Is there anything left to lend money to? Are there any bankable companies left? But we first need, if we started doing that, we would have exactly the same problems in 1, 2, 3 years' time, because of absence of basically legal recourse. The legal system, the judicial system doesn't work. I already mentioned the state banks problem, which I think needs to be addressed. And we should also not forget that most banks, basically the whole banking system, is still distressed because of very large amounts of distressed non-performing debt. And I hope that the two ladies that here will have some comments on that, on how the market is actually dealing with this. But because before there is a solution for that, if you have hundreds of millions and some banks much larger amounts of debt outstanding which is non-performing, you can pretend that it is performing by creating artificially low interest rates and charge the customer 0.5% on grivnia to try and avoid recapitalization requirements, but the problem remains exactly the same, and it needs to be handled before investment and financing can restart. I mentioned money markets. Immediately connected with money markets is actually also the urgent need to start building a yield curve. A yield curve means that you need to have financial instruments which are longer than just a few days or a few weeks. And you need to have the ability to to manage your liabilities and your assets in approximate buckets of the same tenor, and we don't have that. We don't have long-term liabilities in local currency. So therefore, assets with long tenors are just impossible to manage or to generate. And that needs to be addressed, and we are trying to help, we are trying to advise, we are trying to make sure that everybody understands that that is very essential, that it is not just that lending will not restart just by instruction or by convocation by a minister or even a prime minister who will call us into his office and say, start lending. That's not how it works. There are certain things that need to be in place before we can actually do so. I hope this helps as an introduction for the understanding of the issues the way we see it.